4548 Vincent Avenue South. I'm a local business owner, and I have watched the Graves Hospitality projects over many years, as the previous person had just said. They've done great work in the city. They're local. But as a business owner, I have been looking for an uptown location for over a year, and honestly feel that there's a division between where the DuPont and sort of Emerson area is between Lyndale, and I really believe this project will be a great Band-Aid to connect Hennepin and Lyndale from a business perspective. And I think it's going to add a lot of value to all the area residents as well as the businesses. If you look around there, I mean, Arby's and things like that, those are things that need to, there's a need for increased development in that area from a commercial perspective. And so I'm here to support the Graves and request that their wishes are granted. So thank you.
Thank you. Sally?
Good morning. My name is Sally Eblinkner. I am a resident at 3636 Grand Avenue South. I've been a resident of the Uptown neighborhood for the past 20 years. 8 of those years was a rental and Emerson. I am here in support of the hotel for the following reasons. It will be a place for my friends and family to stay near me specifically. It will provide a small eatery for the neighborhood and again for our use. It will provide additional employment opportunities for those in the neighborhood and surrounding. And it will also make the neighborhood more viable for new businesses. And as seen on my specific block on Grand Avenue, it has also increased my property value. Most importantly to me, as a single woman, it activates the sidewalk and eliminates an empty lot. Therefore, there will be more people on that street, on that sidewalk, and increasing the safety value of our neighborhood. Again, I'm in support of this proposal, and I hope that you take this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Troy? Then Rudyard Dyer, Claudette, and Alex.
Good morning. My name is Troy Lenk. I own the building at 1620 Westlake, a commercial building 6 blocks west of the site. I have about 30 employees in the building, and I've got a tenant who also has about 30 employees in the building. We support the project. I spoke earlier about Uptown having many things, shopping, entertainment, restaurant, office, retail services, and no hotel. It seems like everybody wants a hotel in Uptown. But I'm aware of 3 other hotels that have been proposed in Uptown over the last 5 or 8 years. None of them happened. All of those very local neighbors opposed them, but I don't think any of those local neighbors are here today to oppose this hotel. And I'm guessing that these neighbors here today opposing this hotel didn't oppose those other 3 on homes in Calhoun. I'd like to speak briefly about the notch. If you approve this project, I'd encourage you to allow the variance for the side yard setback to allow the notch. I think the last thing Uptown needs is a building that has a notch out of it, an awkward notch that's kind of contrived. And I think if you're going to approve the project overall, the project is best massed on the street as initially proposed by the developer. I'll echo the comments by Mono about needing the hotel rooms for our clients. And I'll echo the comments about the Graves being a stand-up organization who's willing to invest millions of dollars in our neighborhood, my neighborhood, to improve the urban fabric, increase the breadth of services in Uptown, and improve the tax basis for Minneapolis. Please support the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyer, then Claudette and Alex. If there's anyone who hasn't signed in who'd like to speak, could you sign in with the clerk? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rudyard Dyer. I'm a resident of Uptown. I live at 2436 Irving Avenue South. I'm here to voice my support for the hotel. I do have a lot of friends and family that do come to visit in Uptown, and it's just difficult to give them the full Uptown experience, whether that be going around the lakes or food or nightlife or something like that, if they have to constantly be traveling back and forth between downtown or the suburbs of Bloomington or St. Louis Park or something. It's tough to say things that haven't already been said before me, but I would like to reiterate that I think that having Ben and Jim as developers, keeping it local, someone who knows the area, and especially a new concept like the Moxie hotels, where I believe there's only one other one in the entire world, would be fantastic and would be really great for the Uptown area. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudette.
Hello, I'm Claudette Guillermo, and I live on 1426 West 31st Street. and I moved to Uptown, moved to Minneapolis over 3 years ago. I very much enjoy the neighborhood. It suits my lifestyle, and I would personally love to see a hotel in the area. I have very many friends who love to visit the great city of Minneapolis, and I feel that this appears to be a very, very carefully developed project and fits with the continuing changes in Uptown and provides economic development. So I very much support this project by Graves Hospitality, and I hope that you will support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex.
Morning, Madam Chair, council members. My name is Alex Cicchini. I live at 3525 Fremont Avenue South with my wife and son. I'm here today in support of the hotel, urging you to deny the appeals before you for the hotel at Lake and Emerson. I'm going to speak broadly to some of the things regarding zoning in the Uptown Small Area Plan. One of the major flaws underpinning the Small Area Plan is that it actually mischaracterizes the neighborhoods surrounding Uptown and Lake Street in particular, which are populated with 3 to 5 story buildings, apartments, oftentimes abutting single-family homes directly, and oftentimes much more dense than the current zoning would allow. Near my house, down at the south end of Carrag, there's a 4-story building with a commercial use on the basement that would not be allowed by zoning today. This is often disorderly and without balanced transitions, yet it's still a healthy, diverse, walkable, and most importantly, very desirable and valuable neighborhood. It is true that in the 8 years since adoption, the Small Area Plan hasn't kept up with the changing reality. The Uptown core, where the Small Area Plan directs hotels, now only has 5 surface lots available, 2 of which have active development plans on them, and several other ones are very difficult to acquire or develop. Extending the areas allowing higher density outward from the established activity center along Lake, even deeper into the Uptown interiors, is a reasonable response to this reality. Pretending the Uptown Small Area Plan is a pro-development compromise ignores the many, many blocks across the city and as well as the greater Uptown area that are zoned R2B or below, with the Uptown Activity Center and Urban Village representing a very small percentage of total land dedicated to dense development. Despite all these things, I do believe the hotel actually meets the spirit and intent of the Small Area Plan and Comp Plan in many ways. It concentrates commercial activity, jobs, and guests on a commercial and transit corridor served by the best piece of bike infrastructure in the country in the Midtown Greenway. It utilizes district parking. It steps down to the neighborhood facing homes at 60 feet tall, only 4 feet taller than zoning and the Small Area Plan recommend. And it provides generous landscape buffers between the hotel itself and the neighbors. Contrary to the appellant's claims, many people do support this hotel on this lot, as evidenced by a petition that I started, gained over 450 signatures, 85% of which are Minneapolis residents, 30% within the 55408 zip code. Many of these people were not residents of Uptown at the time of the Small Area Plan adoption, or did not feel welcome or able to participate in the creation of the Small Area Plan itself. Development scale, yep, sorry. I urge you to weigh all the things I've spoken about and support the hotel. Thank you.
We have 3 more folks who have signed in, Tom, Nazira, and then Anna. Please come up and state your name and address for the record. Is Tom Johnson here? Oh, thank you. Nazira Mohammed. And then Anna. Is there anyone who would like to speak who hasn't signed in? Okay, so we just have 2 more folks.
Hello, Nazira Mohammed. I live at 3033 Emerson. I just wanted to call in opposition of this plan. The Uptown Small Area Plan is basically a unified and collaborative effort that businesses, commercial, and residents all came together to form. And we as residents support all the local businesses and company. The residents support the businesses, the bars, restaurants, all the shops, and everything on Lake Street. Lake Street is, yes, a wide corridor, but to consider just Lake Street and without the areas surrounding it is a bit narrow-minded. Lake Street does have a lot of commercial areas. It also passes through residential areas, and those residential areas are shown a bit of respect in that small area plan. And to throw away those guidelines and rules, it's just sort of a slap in the face in a way to the community, and especially to those who built their homes based on this plan and this contract, this unified vision that we all worked hard for. we do not oppose a hotel uptown, and I'd like to make that clear. This isn't about opposition to a hotel uptown. We very much support and would like to see a hotel uptown. What we don't like is that a huge structure butted up against our residences. It's very clear in the plan that this is not what is desired, and it's a unified vision. This isn't just based off of us. Again, a lot of other issues, including the parking issue, has not been addressed to our satisfaction. I'm sorry. We don't want to doubt that Ben Graves wants to serve the community, and we don't doubt that you would provide a great service to our community. But we ask that you just respect and honor the small area plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Mathis, 3121 DuPont Avenue South. I was not planning on speaking when I came. I just came for my support. But I oppose the hotel at this particular location. Again, not any hotel, I mean at other locations that honor the Uptown Small Area Plan. I am somebody who spent many hours, going to meetings, many meetings, on the Uptown Small Area Plan, and it was very clear to all of us residents who were working on it that it was going to mean something, and it was going to mean something to everybody. I mean, there were compromises that were made for both the businesses as well as the residents, for many different people, and this was the plan that came up with, and it was very clear to all of us that participated in the plan, and I've read this Uptown Small Area Plan, that it was meant to not be the tall buildings south of Lake Street, that the core was supposed to be north of Lake Street. And there are all sorts of many things that make this difficult, as well as the parking issues. I mean, I live like a block away from where this development is, and we have parking issues where I am. So I can't imagine what it's like even closer to this site and what's going to happen to it. So I just wanted to let you know that I am in opposition to the hotel at this location for the size that it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Final call. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. So we have 3 items on our agenda that are all related to this proposal. So taking it a bit out of order in the listed agenda, we'll now move to item number 7, which is the rezoning. Without the rezoning, the rest of the items are moot. So on item number 7, I will move to approve the rezoning. I'll see if any of my colleagues want to comment. And then I'll go ahead and speak to this rezoning, and then anyone else is very welcome to jump in. So first I want to say that hundreds of people participated in this discussion. My staff and I attended at least 3 neighborhood meetings, and the folks at the Carreg neighborhood organization did a great job of facilitating what is clearly a very emotional subject. And I think it's very fair to say that what is reflected here is also reflected in the greater community, which is that there are definitely people who do not want a hotel on this site at all. There are people who had a lot of comments about the specifics of the design, and there are a lot of people who want to see a hotel in Uptown and here specifically. So there isn't consensus in the community. And when there isn't consensus in the community, we do our best to try to meet everyone's needs. So specifically to the rezoning, I think that it is clear to me, and I think staff did a very good job of articulating in the extensive staff report, which is the bound copy in front of all of you, why our policies support the rezoning. And I think when you look at, our zoning is not perfect. We are trying to regulate a lot of things through our code. We're trying to regulate use, we're trying to regulate bulk and form, and we're also trying to put policies in place that get to the specifics of people's visions for their community. The Uptown Small Area Plan talks about the Lake Street corridor as transitioning away from auto-oriented uses into more of a pedestrian scale street with mixed-use development. And of the 2 zoning classifications, C2 and C3A, C3A is actually more in keeping with that vision for Lake Street that's articulated in the plan. And certainly, as people have highlighted, you can take specific elements of this 123-page plan and make the case for different conclusions. But having reviewed the plan, and again with staff's, I think, very clearly articulated analysis of this rezoning application, I've come to support the rezoning. I think it's also notable that we have had a recent policy discussion about where we should allow hotels of this size. It's certainly not reasonable to suggest that this site in Uptown should be a 20-room hotel. That simply won't happen. So what this will be, if it's not a hotel, is likely a 6-story apartment building. And so again, our code is looking at use, it's looking at bulk. So all of our decisions are made within the legal context of our plans and our zoning, but I think we also need to use common sense. And so to say this can't be a hotel, but it can be an apartment building of the same size, certainly a hotel has different impacts and uses, but again, looking at all of the evidence in front of us and all of the conversations I've had, again, with hundreds of constituents, I've come to the conclusion that the rezoning here is supportable and actually is probably better in keeping with the vision of the plan than the C2 zoning would be. So I'll see if there's any discussion. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've given this a lot of thought. I've really struggled quite a bit with it. I tend to come out on the side of being more cautious and generally more favorable towards neighbors who have concerns about change. In this situation, I happen to agree with Councilmember Bender. I think the zoning at C2 is worse, and something worse will happen here. And I represent a lot of hotels in my ward, and I have found them to be extremely good neighbors. In fact, often better than apartment buildings. And so I think what we're seeing in the city is that people are really in favor of mixed-use development and growth, and that times are changing, and we need to change with those times. I have this drama happening in my ward right now with a 1-story Walgreens going in at 27th and Hennepin. And most people in this audience would say, oh my God, a 1-story big box, ugly Walgreens with the drive-through is a terrible thing. And if we were a group of people generally saying it would be less intense to the neighbors next door, a 1-story Walgreens would be great. A 4-story building with housing and retail below would be much more intense to the neighbors next door, yet the neighbors next door would rather see that than a 1-story Walgreens. So I think for the city to grow in a thoughtful way, we need to have development in places where it makes sense. And I can see how people living on Emerson don't like it. I can, and I empathize with you. But ultimately, it's not just the people living on Emerson we have to pay attention to. It's the broader neighborhood and the broader city. And I do think the rezoning here is defensible. And I would be the kind of person who would say it was not. And I would side with the neighbors without question if I felt that there was enough evidence to support that position. But in this particular situation, I do think the right thing to do is to rezone. And I will want to speak to the CUP on the height, my area of expertise in height and CUPs. But if the rezoning doesn't pass, then there's no need to discuss any of the rest of it.
Is there any further discussion on the rezoning application? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I think it would be advisable to specifically move to adopt the staff findings on the rezoning as well.
Absolutely. So then I'll move to adopt the staff findings to support the rezoning. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Thank you for that reminder. That brings us to the 2 appeals. So item number 1 is the appeal of the front yard setback. So this, at Planning Commission, we did go with the staff recommendation. I'm going to move to grant the appeal. And we can speak about this more under item number 2, but, in my view, this is really a consequence of the significant changes that were made to this project in response to the community's desire to have a shorter building. And so I think the variance is supportable based on the context of the adjacent properties and there being practical difficulties related to fitting what is now a much shorter building on the same site. So I will move approval of that variance. I'll see if there's any discussion. Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Moving to item number 2.
Madam Chair.
And direct staff to prepare findings to support the variance. All those in approval, please say aye. Aye. And any opposed? And that carries. I'll do better this number 2. All right. So our final item on this particular project is item number 2. This is appeal of the conditional use permit and variances. There are 4 items here: a conditional use permit to increase height from 4 stories to 6 stories, subject to conditions, a variance to increase the maximum FAR, a variance to reduce the east rear yard setback from 15 feet to 0, and a variance to reduce the minimum loading requirement from 1 large space to 0. I will move to deny those 4 appeals. Let's see if there's discussion. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This issue of height is vexing. It's vexing in my ward, and I deal with it a lot. And I just want to make sure I support the variance on height. In a C2 and in a C3, additional height is allowed. That's what a conditional use permit means. It's allowed with conditions. It's not a height limit. And I think that there's some confusion over that. And I want to continue to put an end to the confusion over this issue. A variance means you have a higher standard. There has to be a hardship, some practical difficulty with the property. But a conditional use permit means allowed with conditions. So I don't see a scenario where we can say no to the height when a conditional use permit is all that's required. And that would have been the case in the C2 or the C3. This is not a height limit. I don't really want to speak to whether or not I think 72 feet is too tall or 56 feet is too low. What I know is that the code allows them to ask for this, and as long as there are conditions placed on it, in this particular situation, they made it lower, closer to the neighbors, it's allowed in this area, and as a result of that, I'll support it.
Okay, is there further discussion? So I will speak to these items very briefly, but I also do want to just address this issue that was raised about the parking. So there was not an appeal of the site plan review, which is, I think, where we would normally deal with this, but I do, in addition to moving denial of the applications, I want to add a condition of approval to make sure that we do deal with this concern about parking. So we have Ms. Holeen. Maybe you could give us a little detail about this issue, the background, and then I have a proposal for how to handle this so that we ensure that we do have the needed contract in place for valet parking.
Yes, Chair Bender. The applicant, when the project was prepared, was indicating that valet parking would be accommodated with spaces that were leased in the parking ramp at Calhoun Square. So the requirements for valet parking require that the valet be done by a licensed valet service to some sort of parking facility within 800 feet of the site, and they were able to demonstrate that they met that. They also provided a lot of evidence showing, time of valet transactions, how long it would take to get from the hotel to the ramp, where those routes would be, where the valet drivers would be going. So we did base our analysis off of Calhoun Square. We've now been informed that that may not be where this parking ends up, but they are working on valet locations that were also within 800 feet of the site. It's been done in the past where uses have come in with valet parking, and we just put a condition of approval on the application that the valet parking needed to be secured before we issue building permits. There actually was an approved condition of approval on the site plan review application that required that they maintain a licensed valet service for parking within 800 feet of the site. And that condition of approval was approved as part of the site plan review, and that application wasn't appealed. So that condition of approval actually stays with the application. The reason why we're comfortable doing it that way is clearly without land use applications, they're not going to enter into a lease agreement because they don't have a viable project until the land use is approved. So one thing has to come before the other, and we certainly would not issue any permits if they don't have that signed valet contract at the time they come in to construct the building. So we will continue to work with the applicant on that. We will make sure that the TDMP addresses that and that the TDMP is signed before building permits are issued, and that we maintain a signed copy of that licensed valet contract before permits are issued.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions about this piece? Then I have just summarized what you have presented, and I've emailed it to the clerk. So I will then go ahead and just make that motion. Just again, it's what we were, I think staff would do anyway, but just to make sure we're all clear. So I will move then to add as a condition of approval that the applicant shall ensure that the travel demand management plan reflects the location of valet parking and its associated vehicle circulation. The valet parking shall comply with Chapter 541 of the zoning ordinance, and the applicant shall obtain approval of the TDM plan from CPED and Public Works prior to the issuance of a building permit for the development. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for bringing this up at this late date, but at this minute, but parking has now become an issue. I'm just wondering if the applicant would be agreeable to putting the cost of the parking into the cost of the room. I'm very concerned that if you charge $24 for valet parking, people won't use it. And then they'll just park on the street right by the neighbors, and that's exactly what they want to avoid, is having that heavy impact. So can you, Madam Chair, would you allow the applicant to speak to whether or not that's possible? And this is different. It's in a neighborhood. So I don't think it would be fair to say, well, this isn't going to be a $6 charge. I'm going to guess it's probably going to be like a $24 charge. So it would be a nice concession to the neighbors if you would agree to make that part of the room charge or discount it back if you don't use it. Otherwise, we're going to be back here dealing with enforcement of parking of people who come to use the hotel.
Sure.
Thanks, Lisa Goodman. I guess, we'd have to think that over a little bit. Just to give you an example, though, of the usage at a hotel versus other types of usage that could be maybe at this site, a larger scale restaurant with 150 seats or 200 seats, where you do have a lot of valet happening at one period of time. In a hotel situation, in our experience in both neighborhood hotels and in urban downtown hotels, we're seeing less than 30% people come to the hotel via their own vehicle. And so most people are coming with taxis, with Ubers. The majority of our guests will be, within the neighborhood. I don't foresee this as being as big as an issue as maybe some people perceive. We're looking at we assume we're going to have about 30 to 35 cars when we're full at 100% occupancy. And so it's something to consider. The way that people reserve hotel rooms and the way that those things, happen, it's hard for me to commit to that, today, because we'll also get people, well, I'm not parking, so can I get a discount? Or, there's going to be a lot of those kinds of, questions. And I do, I do see the concern. There's tons of parking, believe it or not, in the neighborhood, but it's paid parking. I parked last night. I went to Cena, and I happened to drive instead of take my bike, which I do sometimes. But I parked downstairs in the Walkway building, and there was one car in that parking lot last night. I don't perceive this as much of an issue for out-of-town travelers that are used to paying for parking if they rent a car. I guess that's my opinion at this point. We can talk further, and I'm willing to work with the neighborhood. We obviously don't want a negative impact on the neighborhood. We want a positive impact for the neighbors, and we want to be great neighbors. We're going to do everything in our best ability to make sure that we are good neighbors.
Madam Chair, I do think this is something that needs to be discussed between the neighbors and the applicant, perhaps before the final council action. I also ate at Cena last week. I valet parked. It was $9. I was completely outraged by it. And if I was not lazy and willing to walk, I for sure would have parked in the neighborhood without question. I'm just being honest. So am I the only one? It was cold, so I got paid. But I didn't actually pay. The person I was with paid, so I didn't mind. But I would have parked in the neighborhood and walked without question. So I guess I can see how the neighbors would think this would be a problem. And so even if it won't be a problem to you, I think you should try to work with them. I can see where you don't want to have it be part of the price and how do you do it online. But if people drive up to your place, then give the valet parking for free. And then you won't have to worry about who valet parks and who doesn't. I would be very annoyed if I lived on a street with R2B zoning. Ask the folks who live around Giordano's what they think of it. No one is parking with Giordano's valet. They got rid of it because no one would pay $7, and they're all parking on Humboldt right now. So I do think it's something that has to be addressed. I don't want to dictate how. This is not the role for me, but it would be good if that's something that could be taken into consideration with Councilmember Bender's motion with regard to the TDM and how the valet would work. And maybe you have some cool, new, unique way to figure it out.
We'll keep an eye. We'll keep an open mind there and come up. Look at different solutions. There does have to be a distinction, though, between there's a pretty significant distinction between you or me when I went to dinner last night versus someone traveling. coming in to do overnight. In our experience, they're very different guests. It's not the same person.
So I think we're good with that. I do appreciate this point, Councilmember Goodman, and I think, no, I actually hesitate to even mention this, but I actually think the greater problem, to your point, is that there's sort of a dysfunction in how we're managing parking in high-use areas like Uptown. So you can park on the street for free, but you have to pay a lot of money to park in the ample structured parking that is very expensive to build. And so really over time, probably what we really need to do is look at our parking policies in residential neighborhoods that are right near commercial and understand how we can better manage the cost of on-street parking. So no one wants parking meters, and folks don't probably want to pay for on-street parking in front of their houses. So this will be a terribly unpopular idea. So just to add insult to injury. All right. So I also struggle with how we would add something like that as a condition of approval to a land use application. So I think what I would like to offer is that I take you at your word that you're willing to work with the neighbors, and this is a big issue for folks who live right nearby. And I'm very sympathetic to the concerns of the folks who live right on this block, to having cars driving, in the neighborhood. I actually think that would be worse again with an apartment building, but I want to make sure that we are keeping in touch over time, that this isn't the end of this conversation about parking and traffic flow in the community. Okay, so I think, so now we have a motion that is denial of the conditional use permit appeal, the appeal for the 3 variances, and then we have this additional condition of approval related to having a contract in place for the parking and the related to the TDMP. And Mr. Wittenberg has a comment.
Chair Bender, if I could just confirm that the committee wishes to retain any conditions of approval that may have been part of these applications in the Planning Commission's approval of those applications.